more on this, I'm joined by our international affairs editor, Philip Turl. Philip, good to see you. As I mentioned, Palestine does have observer status. What would becoming a full member change for them?
Well, basically, if they were allowed to become a full member of the United Nations, they would no longer have just observer status. They'd be able to take part in voting, in resolutions, for example, and the Palestinians would also have more leverage in pushing their own case for a two-state solution, an independent Palestinian homeland. They'd also be able to take part in UN commissions, for example. All of that they can't do. They've been given this observer status since 2012, which is basically putting them in the same situation as the Vatican, for example. But they can't become a full-fledged member of the United Nations until they are actually elected into doing that. Now, there is another reason that this is all happening right now, and that is basically because I think that from the point of view of the Palestinians, they know that there is pretty much no hope that they're going to win this vote which is due to take place tomorrow evening, Paris time, that's 19 hours GMT. But at the moment, they know the international community is pretty much up in arms against Israel, and that Israel is becoming more and more criticized for its role in what is happening in the Gaza Strip. So they see this as like an open door to try to push their case much more in a much stronger way right now to obtain this full-fledged membership of the United Nations, even if they know that it's pretty much going to be difficult for them, practically impossible for them to pull this off. But this is a moment in a long struggle from the Palestinians' point of view in trying to get that full United Nations membership.
Yes, this is sort of a symbolic measure that's doomed to fail. What are the roadblocks making it particularly hard for Palestine to become a full member?
Well, there are quite a few roadblocks. The first one is that they need two-thirds approval within the General Assembly of the United Nations to be able to obtain that full-fledged status. But only that two-thirds majority can happen if the permanent members of the UN Security Council, there are 5, Britain, France, China, Russia and the United States, don't veto the move. What looks pretty certain, as you were saying earlier on, is that the United States is going to veto that move, so that means it'll be dead in the water before it even gets to the negotiating table. It does appear that out of the 15 members of the UN Security Council, the permanent members and the non-permanent members, there are about 13 or so who are going to be in favour of giving Palestine full status. And the Palestinians say, well, look, there are over 100 countries in the world that are 140 countries that recognize Palestine as a state. There is no reason for us not to get this full membership of the United Nations.
The U.S., though, wants, a two-state solution, so why are they voting against Palestine?
Well, what the U.S. is arguing here is that this is not really something that should be worked out within the United Nations. It says what we need to see is Palestine and Israel working out together an agreement on the creation of a two-state solution. Once that has gone through, then there will be reason to believe that Palestine could be given full status at the United Nations. It's not up to the United Nations to decide in the place of an agreement between Israel, a bilateral agreement between the two, what the future status of Palestine should be. It's also difficult for the United Nations to recognize Palestine when there is the Gaza Strip run by Hamas and the West Bank, which is run by the Palestinian National Authority, and no specific borders have already been drawn up that have been agreed by the international community. So all of those are factors that are pushing the United States to vote against. There's also something else that the United States, I think, is quite keen to pull out here of the hat, if you like, and that is that they know that Benjamin Netanyahu is under increasing pressure, and they are not willing to vote in favour of Palestine becoming a full-fledged member of the United Nations Security Council or the United Nations full stop, because they want to have elections in Israel, and they want Benjamin Netanyahu out of the picture. They want to finish with the Netanyahu era and move on to something else. And they feel that if they are going to give their agreement to Palestine becoming a full-fledged member of the United Nations, that will push the Israelis or part of Israeli society back into the arms of the hard right, far right, like they are at the moment. And that will create a much more difficult situation and prolong the difficult situation that Israel is in right now with the war in Gaza. And they want that to come to an end, and they want a more moderate government in Israel to take over. So they say that if we're going to vote in favor of Palestine becoming a full-fledged member of the United Nations, that's going to have an adverse effect in Israel, because Israel is very much against that move. Now, there's one other thing that is quite important to underline here, and that is that I think the United States, there is a possibility, but we don't know whether this is going to happen. There is a possibility the United States might not vote against the admission of Palestine to become a full-fledged member of the United Nations, but might abstain. That would be a first for the United States to do that. And if they do abstain, this would be more critical, be perceived as being a more critical decision in the face of the intransigence of Benjamin Netanyahu. This would cause, I think, increasing problems for Benjamin Netanyahu at home, where some in Israel will be saying, look, the United States is almost willing to vote in favor of Palestine becoming a member of the United Nations. It's abstained this time round. This is because of the actions that you've been undertaking in Gaza and the refusal to negotiate with the international community. Be very careful. So it could be the way of the US trying to say to Benjamin Netanyahu, look, we're going to abstain. This is because we don't agree with what you're doing.
All right. Well, it'll be interesting to see if they go so far as taking that step. Philip, thank you so much for that. That's our international affairs editor, Philip Turl.